All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Called Podcast. This is episode 3, and today I have Carlos Rodriguez with us today, a past SM from Denmark. Carlos, would you like to tell them a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a senior math major here at Walla Walla. I'm originally from Northern California, but yeah, I've definitely fallen in love being up here in Walla Walla.
Awesome, awesome. So, just to kind of get started, what made you choose Denmark, and what
So
exactly did you do there? Sorry.
no, it's all good. So I decided on Denmark because I just kind of needed a break from Walla Walla. Like I really love it here, but I had finished my first year and I had switched my major early on into my second year. I switched my major again, and I think I just needed like a bit of a break from college, like a mental reset. I needed to mature a little bit. And so I knew I just needed some year away from Walla in general. And I really wanted to go to Europe. I've never been in Europe before. And I just didn't really want to ACA. I just wanted a break from doing school in general. And so I started to look for SM opportunities in Europe. And one of the first ones I could find was Denmark. And at the time, I was looking around in about October, so it was really early in the year, and it was the only call up that was in Europe. And so I decided I was going to do my SM application. I was going to apply to Denmark, and if I didn't get Denmark, then I wasn't going to SM, and I was just going to figure out being here at Walla Walla.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I that's part of like it's called like the called podcast, and like I really felt called there because like I had decided I'm not going anywhere other than this place. And I remember Brittany, who was the director at the time, told me, everyone applies to Denmark. Like if you don't get it, like don't feel bad. Like there's other
Mhm.
opportunities. And I just told her flat out again, like I'm not going anywhere if it's not Denmark. And so getting that email saying like, oh, like yeah, you're accepted to come here to Denmark. Like, do you want to come? Was really cool. My experience as a SM there was a bit different than probably normal SMs, where you typically work as deans there, and so you do about like 40 hours of like deaning a week, which means like you're living in the dorms with the students, like you're doing night checks, waking them up. Um, my responsibilities went a little bit further than that. We had a teacher that quit halfway through the year and was like gone for other parts. So pretty early on, I started taking over a lot of like teaching positions for like computers and like math. So my job was kind of split between deaning and teaching.
Gotcha. And those teaching positions were for high school, I would assume?
It was like some was in elementary, some was like kind of in middle school. Kind of the general range was between second and like ninth grade. And I
Oh,
teach like
wow.
kind
Okay.
of classes for all of them.
So would you would you teach every day, or how did that like teaching schedule kind of look for you?
Yeah, I taught every day. It was always in the morning, so like I would typically my day would start out like I'd wake up at probably 6:30, kind of get ready a little bit, like wake up the boarding students for them to go to school, um, eat a little breakfast, go back to my room, get my lesson plans together, like get dressed, get changed and stuff, and then I'd head to my first lesson like around 8 o'clock. And usually that time I'd teach like fourth grade, like computers or math, and then I'd move over to like fifth and sixth, like computers, math, and then up to like seventh through ninth. I'd kind of just kind of float around like teaching, and then probably around like one or like two, I'd be done teaching for the day, and I'd go back and like kind of relax for like a couple hours, and then get ready for like all the like evening, afternoon sort of deaning.
Mm. Got you, got you. That's super cool. How were I mean, just because I don't really know too much about like the positions, especially in Denmark or the positions in Europe, but specifically in Denmark. What kind of resources did you have, like to teach and stuff like that? Like, do you feel they gave you enough resources and you were prepared enough, or how did that kind of go?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The director for like the deans was brand new when I got there, and
Mm,
so I would definitely say resources felt like a bit lacking at times. Um, the director didn't have like a clear like vision of this is what like our SMs are gonna do. Um, Typically, also in Denmark, they don't call them student missionaries; they're called volunteers. So I might switch between saying volunteers and SMs, but um, yeah, they would ask like the volunteers to do some things, and then the next week it might change. And so resources felt like a bit limited, especially on the teaching front. They hadn't had really anybody come in and like teach classes.
Mm,
So I was kind of on my own to lesson plan and like figure out, am I going to try to teach this in English, or am I going to try to like learn like enough Danish words to teach like this little
mm,
lesson in Danish? And yeah, it was definitely a bit tough. There wasn't a ton of guidance in the specific teaching area. I'd say in deaning maybe a little bit more, but it's definitely gotten better as time's gone on, and like the director's like kind of gotten into her position a bit more. But it was a
hmm.
bit tough at the beginning.
Interesting, interesting. I mean, it's interesting from my perspective, just because I know that, and I feel like a lot of people would probably say like, oh, like the Europe positions are like, um, how should I word this? Just like not as difficult in terms of resources at the very least, just because they're not,
Yeah,
they're not like. But the way that you're saying it is like, even though that it might have appeared as more of a luxurious position, like you were still having difficulties with like basic necessities as resources, just as any other SM would, or volunteer in your case. So
yeah.
that's really interesting to hear more about. Um, when you were, especially from like the teaching side, how did you feel like you were supported from the school, or like from the other deans or other administration there?
Yeah, so I initially felt like I didn't have a ton of support.
Mhm.
Like kind of Danish cultures are like they're very like friendly up front, but kind of like beyond that front of like friendliness, it's really hard to like make these like deeper connections with. And so
Mm,
since I didn't interact with like these teaching staff like as much, it kind of gave like a sense of like, oh, I'm not actually that close to them. So when I would struggle, I almost felt like I couldn't like reach out to them for that.
mm,
And I remember it was probably about, I don't know, probably like January, February, probably like February or March. And so I'd been teaching like a while at this point, and one of the classes I'd been teaching was just like the kids were like just not like great. Like they would like cuss at me all the time, and like yeah, they were just like really like rude, and like finally like I kind of hit like my snapping point, not with them, but like I got done with the lesson and I went to like the principal or the vice principal who was like kind of in charge of me
right.
as far as my teaching roles. And I was like, dude, like I like can't do this. Like every day, like I'm like trying to teach them, like they don't listen, like they say all these mean things to me, like they cuss at me, and I it's just too much stress. And the dude was like, okay. I was like, so, and he's like, I'll go talk to them, and like if it doesn't get any better, like we'll find a replacement for it, like we'll figure it out. And
Mm,
that like made me feel like so much better about it. And I think like that can be kind of generalized to most calls. Like even though you're like a foreigner and like you feel like really out of place and like it's hard to like ask for a lot of help sometimes, the people there really want to help you and they want you to
hmm.
succeed. And it was more like getting out my own comfort zone of, oh, like I can ask for help. Like this is normal to need help and like want help in these situations. Um, and like the support is there and they want you to succeed. It just you just have to reach out for it, even though like it kind of
Yeah.
sucks to ask for help sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. No, especially I feel like it's difficult for SMs to understand that sometimes the people that are in charge of us or responsible in our different locations, they're in just as much of, in a struggle as we are, because they might either, like you were saying, like he was a fresh director, or, they also don't have the resources that they would want to be able to provide the help that we would want from them. So it's definitely like it's a good point to bring up, to be able to reach out to the people on your location, because even though it might not seem like they necessarily quote unquote care, or they might think that, or you might think that, just because you're going through something hard, that they won't be able to understand it, like 100% they'll probably understand exactly what you're going through, because either they've been through it or they're going through it at the same time. And so it's definitely important for people to understand that when you're in these locations, to be able to reach out, and all you have to do is really just go and talk to them, and I'm 100% most of the time they'll be willing to help out. What would you say was the hardest thing about your year in Denmark?
No, that's like a tough one. I think kind of two factors. So one on like the work front, like since I was doing both like the deaning and teaching, like I probably worked like between like 70 to like 80 hours a week, especially if I was
Mm,
working a weekend. And like that balance is just hard. And like like late night lesson planning at like midnight when I get off my deaning shift, then plan for like the next day to teach is like just
Mm-hmm.
tough. And I think like anybody who's teaching can like relate to that because you're teaching all throughout the day, then you're like wanting to like hang out with the students, build connections, and suddenly you get to the end of the day and you're like dead. But you have to prepare for the next day because otherwise, like, what are you gonna do? And
Yeah.
I think the second like really hard aspect of it is like spirituality there. Like we kind of think like in the US, like, oh man, we're kind of becoming more secular, but once you go to like Denmark, who's like probably one of the most like secular countries like right now, it's like you get there and there's really like just a lack of like spirituality there.
Mm.
Probably like percent of students there who were like actually like practicing like Adventists was like maybe like 15%. And
Wow.
so wanting to build like either spiritual connections with students or even like maintain your own like spiritual growth is super hard when you don't have really people around you who want to also build that up. Like we're really
Mm.
blessed to be here at Walla Walla, where a lot of people share the same um, drive to like build up our spirituality, or like we have these opportunities like Vespers and like worship throughout the week. But when you're in a place where maybe the students don't really value that, or like don't take it seriously, or you're in charge of like disciplining them to make sure they're listening to like church or not like on their phones and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you really miss out on building up your own spirituality or maintaining it or making those sort of connections with anybody.
Yeah. Dang. Yeah, for sure. How was it, or how did you, I guess, kind of like bridge that gap, that disconnect that you were lacking over there? Yeah. How did that go about for you?
I think it took me a long time to kind of get a good feel of how to bridge that gap. At first, I think with the busyness and adapting to a new place, I think I almost like, gave it up completely. I don't think I was really spending much time or like concentrated effort on, um, you know, talking with God, like reading like devotionals or like doing something to stay connected. But it's probably, I don't know, like 2 or 3 months in, like I hit kind of a breaking point. I was like, I don't have the strength to like do this by myself all the time.
Mm.
And I'd reached out to like friends there or reached out to staff there, and I realized like who I'm not reaching out to is like I'm not building up my relationship with God or like reaching out to Him at
Mm-hmm.
all. And I think that was like a necessary breaking point for me to be like, okay, I need to like redial in, focus in on that. And I woke up a bit earlier. I'd do a little prayer time, maybe devotional time, and I made sure to end my day also with that. And I think
Mm.
I've talked to people on islands, and it's maybe they might wake up early, go on a walk, and do something like that. And since none of the students really care about that in Denmark, it was hard to think of ideas to really do that. Um, but yeah, kind of this waking up and making sure I also ended my day with some sort of like prayer devotion was like really good too.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a challenge. I think for SMs to understand that when you go to these locations, you have to do your own part to like continue building that relationship with God, because a lot of people would just assume that you go to these positions, these locations, and you just assume that you're going to be, strengthening your relationship with God just because you're in the mission field doing His work. But at the end of the day, like, it's really up to you whether you continue to build that relationship, or if you just continue to just live out your day-to-day life without really doing anything to strengthen that bond, that relationship, that connection. So that's super important, I think, for everyone to understand that you need to. It's a two-way street. You have to be able to do your part to continue to build that relationship. But kind of going back to the idea of connecting with the kids, how did you find yourself, like, what were the best ways that you would do to connect with the kids, especially since there was kind of like that disconnect that you were talking about?
At first, I really thought soccer was gonna be my way. Like everyone in Denmark loves playing soccer. They'd have leagues, and I had the opportunity to play like on the team with them in a league.
That's
But
super cool.
then the first week, about 4 days into being in Denmark, I broke my pinky, which shouldn't normally be a big deal, but apparently it's like this spiral fracture. And it was on my right hand, sorry. And I had a whole cast from like my fingertips, like down, like halfway down my arm. And like, like I couldn't write, I couldn't do anything. They said I couldn't play. And then by the time like I got it off, like the soccer season was almost over. Um, and so I had to find other ways, which at the beginning was like gaming. So Denmark really big into gaming. I would stay up like late with students like playing or like play with them throughout the day, which sounds like kind of dumb, but it's like it's what they love, and you find like
Yeah.
things that they like. Another big way was I really wanted to learn Danish, and the students
Mm,
loved like trying to like help teach you Danish. And so
mm-hmm,
I'd pick like some students and be like, okay, like I want to be able to say these things, like, help me like learn how to formulate these sentences or like
mm-hmm,
structure, and they'd help me. You could kind of rotate between, and you get a good feel of like, okay, these students really want to help you with this. These students like gaming. Um, later on, like we had a car that we could drive, and so you take them on like kind of late night McDonald's runs. Um, but yeah, kind of odd stuff like that until we hit the spring again and we could play more soccer. But indoor soccer was really big there too. Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely important if you're in, a deaning position or a teaching position, to not just be a teacher, but like try to actually connect with your students or with your peers or whatever it is, and at the end of the day, like you kind of have to just figure out what they love, whether it's video games like you're talking about or some sort of sport or whatever, and, kind of just like cater to that in a way, I guess. And, even if it means like, I know in my position, we technically weren't supposed to like drive students around or whatever for like food, but like every now and then we would just kind of just be like, hey, you know what? Let's just go for a food run. And luckily, like the principal was okay with it. But and of course, it's in moderation, obviously. But like,
Yeah.
you kind of have to do what you got to do to like make those connections with the students, because if you think that you're just gonna be able to teach and they're gonna love you, like that is obviously not gonna work. Like you're gonna have to spend time outside of your teaching hours to establish those connections. But yeah, you were talking about how like it was hard for you to kind of like, especially with like the disconnect between like the languages. That's something that I wouldn't really like think about, especially in like a European location. But could you talk a little bit more about that, and or just any general like culture shock that you received
Mhm.
while you were there?
Yeah, honestly, Denmark and the US is like feels very similar right at first. Like you have all these like modern things, like very up to date technology. Everyone's into like the pop culture and like knows all the music and stuff. And so at first you feel like, oh, like this is actually like really comfortable, like not much of a cultural difference. And I remember it was like the first week that we were eating in the capital of students. We got there like a little bit earlier before the students, so we've been eating like us volunteers together. And so the students got there and we're like sitting in the caf, and our boss was like, oh, everyone sit at different tables, mingle with the students. And at first sounds like a great idea. And I go and I sit down with these group of students. I'm like, oh, hey, I'm Carlos, I'm the new volunteer. And like, oh, hi, Carlos. Ask me like they asked me a couple questions in English, and then it's almost after like 10 seconds, like they all go silent. They turn to each other and just start speaking Danish, and it's almost like
Mm,
you're sitting there eating by yourself then, because you try to start conversation and you ask a question like, oh, what are you into? And they might say a couple things and then immediately switch back to Danish talking to their
mm,
friends. And that language barrier was so hard to break at the beginning. And they were just so used to volunteers coming and not caring about learning Danish or really
mm,
wanting to learn about their culture. They almost become numb to this idea of like allowing like the volunteers like into their own culture. And so it took like a lot of effort and kind of wall breaking to really get into there. So yeah, I think as far as culture shock, a lot of things feel similar, and so there wasn't that immediate feeling of like, oh, I'm this brand new culture.
right.
Once the kind of feeling of like, oh, I don't know the language, I can't really get close to them, and then I think I'd mentioned before, like there's like this upfront, like very like nice, very friendly, and then just past it, there's like nothing, and it's really hard to make
Mm,
these deep connections without knowing like a Dane for probably like 6 months, and so that was really tough to break through. That felt really different than America. You can like go up to somebody and be friendly and almost like friends with them after like 20 minutes, whereas there it really takes a long time of like relationship building to get there.
hmm Did you have any like again, I don't really know a ton about the positions over there, but I know that there's only I think like one or two positions, like the women's dean and the boys dean. Um, was there any other like Americans or anything like that like in your location or
Yeah, so we ended up having, when I first got there, I think we had 6 people. So we had 3 guys deans, 3 girls deans. And then after winter break, we ended up having 2 and 2. Sorry, two guys, 3 girls. And
Hmm.
so one of them actually goes here to Walla Walla. I went with Brooke Thompson. So it was nice to have somebody from Walla Walla, same exact culture there, and like be able
Hmm.
to relate in like a lot of ways. And then typically there's like maybe like 2 people from Brazil, and then maybe like a couple people from Australia. And so it is also weird, like, maybe in some other locations it's all people from America. And so
Hmm.
even though you're different places in America, like you're still from America. And so
Hmm.
there, like, not only did you have this mix of like culture with Denmark, but like I learned all these like cool like Australian slang and like also Brazilian slang because like I was working with these Brazilians, um, which you can all relate that the culture is weird, that you're not weird, but like different that you're going
Different.
into.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then it's kind of funny, you're like, man, what they did was that was kind of different. And then you kind of talk to the other like, oh, I would do this, and the Brazilian or Australian might be like, oh, what? That's different. I would have done this.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I guess we're just all different, but you can kind of relate that this other group is a little different.
Yeah. That's super cool. And then I know that I think you were able to see Josh Bevins as well while you were there,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
How
I was
did
able
that
to
all?
see.
What position? I don't even. I forgot what position he was in. But how did that? How did that all come together? Like, because I think you guys have some time to travel around Europe as well. Would you care to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I got the opportunity to travel like pretty much anytime the students were on break.
Mm.
We would lock down like the whole dorm, so we might be there a day late and get back a day early. But during the breaks, we could travel. And yeah, we had another person from Walla Walla, his name Josh Bevins. He was working in what's it called? He was working in England. I can't remember the name of the school, but it was like a high school, like a boarding high school
Mm.
there. And so yeah, he was working there. I was working in Denmark. Like saw it, like post pics, and he's like, "Hey, like we should like meet up and travel." And so
Yeah.
me and Brooke like met up with him in England, and like we traveled around a bit. We met up in Spain. Um, I think that is like a really cool part of being in Europe and like having the opportunity
Hmm.
to travel. I think I traveled to 20 different countries, and
That's super cool.
if you're like wanting to go to like Denmark and do an SM call, like you don't have to have a ton of money to do that. Like I definitely did not like have a ton of money before I went. I did not save enough before. And I still traveled a ton. Like you can travel cheaply and like you get a little bit of stipend and like
Mm.
you're being smart about it, you definitely can travel. Um, because of my teaching and stuff, I was very fortunate to maybe have a little bit bigger stipend than some people might normally get. So I would recommend like if you want to do it, like save up money and stuff for sure. But like being able to travel and experience different cultures, I think is a huge part of like the human experience and like SMing. And if you're gonna do this call, like take advantage of the opportunities you have, like see other cultures, visit other places.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, one thing that I haven't really talked about on this podcast is stipends. Stipends are, your lifesavers over, well, in whatever
Yeah.
call you're in, because I know I barely had any money when I got to Major as well. And I just had to solely rely on those stipends.
Mhm.
And even though, like, like you said, like the stipends vary. I mean, your location, the stipend might be more than in other locations. But honestly, at the end of the day, like, usually they're like dependent on, how, like, what the cost of living is in
Mhm.
a different in each location. So money is one thing that you don't have to worry about as an SM. That's one thing
Yeah.
that I really talked about on this podcast. But that's one cool thing about Europe is, as how Carlos was saying, is that it allows you to kind of travel even if you might not have saved money. So that's super cool that you were able to have the opportunity to go around. Um, just kind of looking, now that you're back, like, what is one thing that you could take away from your SM experience, that you've been able to put into practice now that you're not in the mission field?
I think the biggest thing is like the spirituality like component of it. I think before, I grew up going to like an Adventist school. I went there from like first grade till like I graduated high school, and then immediately came to Walla Walla and was surrounded by more Adventists, and it was almost like my spirituality didn't have to be my own. Like it could be everyone else's around me. Um, and being in this new environment like really made me have to make it my own. And so that was a big thing I was able to take back, which I'll be honest, has like diminished a bit like as I've been back, and like with
Mhm.
COVID and stuff, like it's harder. But that was definitely a way I matured. And I think honestly, just being able to take more responsibility and, balance my life more. Like I was so, not that I'm very mature now, but like I was so much more like immature before I left. But when you are forced to be like in charge or like the adult there, it
Yeah.
really, it's almost like fake it till you make it. Like I faked being an adult
Yeah,
for
for
like
real.
11 months, and now I'm like an adult, I guess,
Yeah.
and I think that has like helped me here at Walla Walla. I think it makes me almost look back and be like, wow, I almost wish I did this earlier, or like took a year
Mm,
off to really mature before I came to college. And not everyone needs that, but I think it can be a really big growing experience of just seeing other people's views. Like when I talk to new people now, I'm not as ingrained into my own view because I've seen such different views. And I think it really matures the way you think about yourself and like think about others and like other people's viewpoints. And yeah, it's just a really valuable way to get experience in the real world.
yeah. I feel that, and that's, definitely a common trend. I feel like throughout a lot of SMs, like, obviously you're, like you said, like you're forced to become responsible and the adult. And not only are you forced to be an adult, but you're forced to be in these different positions. For you, it was a dean, also a teacher, and you can't obviously act like you can here because your responsibilities are a lot bigger than what they are back here at home. But what is one thing about your call specifically that you wish you would have known about before you had gone, if there's anything?
I think definitely the kind of lack of spirituality. You like they call us volunteers, and it does really feel like we're more volunteers than student missionaries.
Mm,
Um, and if you're looking for this call where like you're gonna show up and you're gonna like change people's lives and you know make them like followers of God, like this isn't the place. I would almost argue that almost no SM calls are really that. Um, and I think you make a lot more impact on people than you think, but it doesn't show up.
mm-hmm,
And I think especially in Denmark, you're not gonna have this big like, I made this person really believe in God and choose God to be their own person. And I think that can be okay. I think they might be in a place where they just need like exposure to like good like Christians who like care about them,
mm-hmm,
and you can be that. But you really have to like have some expectation setting that you're not going there, you're not going to be like this big like student missionary, like you're more of a
mm-hmm,
volunteer, and you can like subtly influence and like show that like spirituality has helped me and it's great in my life, and it can be great in yours if you choose to accept that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that you kind of nailed it on that one. A lot of times, I feel like there's this impression that you're gonna go and like you said, just like completely change people's lives, which of course you can, but at the same
Yeah.
time, it is important to note that you might not, or at least not in ways that you would picture
Mhm.
or imagine. I know in a lot of locations, like a lot of the students or a lot of the people that you're interacting with, they already have their own like set religion and set
Mhm.
beliefs. So it's not like you're going to people that like have no idea about like Christianity or whatever other religion that they might be a part of. And you're just gonna show up and you're just gonna completely change their life and just, but at the same time, it's important, like you said, to just like show them what it is to be like a good Christian, good Adventist, and and through your actions, that's how you will most benefit. Impacting others, and I think that is very important to note. Um, so yeah, that I'm kind of losing my train of thought. I was just kind of going on
Yeah.
about that, but
Sorry,
I think
along the lines
just
of that, like, oh yeah, I don't know if you experienced this too, but like since I've been back like 2 years now, and
mhm,
since being back this long, I can look back and see ways that I've like impacted people more as I've stepped back than when I was there. When I was there, I
mhm,
probably spent like the first like almost like 6 to 8 months feeling like I wasn't doing anything at all.
mhm,
Um, but then even like, I was the first month I was gone, I was like, wait, maybe I did, and like some of these students are still like contacting me and stuff. Like that's kind of cool. And you get like a year out, and like some students are still talking to you. Like, wait, like I really did like impact these kids.
mhm,
Um, and I don't know if that's been in your experience too, but like the more like I've stepped back, some of the more like I can see that I actually did do something there, and it might not have felt like it, and it might not have been the biggest changes, but I really did do something.
Hmm. No, yeah, and I think I think a lot of people can relate to that. That passive SEMs can relate to that. It's not necessarily. It takes. I feel like it takes a while to realize how much you actually did. And again, it may not necessarily be you pointing to a Bible and saying, "Hey, this is the truth." Of course, what you can do, but I think it's important to note that again, it's just mostly just your actions. To be honest, that will speak for itself and will impact whoever you're around. And that's just one aspect of SMing that you don't really get to realize until you are no longer in your position in your location. So yeah, I think that's one thing that again just needs to be emphasized, I think, more. So I'm glad that we were able to bring that topic up. So yeah, I mean, what would you recommend Denmark as a good place to SM?
Yeah, I think Denmark's super cool. I think um, because of maybe some lack of like structures in some way, like it can be really what you want it to be.
Mm,
And if you're looking for a place to maybe you don't feel like you're the strongest spiritually, and like you want to go to a place where you can influence people, and maybe you don't feel like you can be somebody who's like just straight like ministering and stuff, like this can still be a good way to influence and like impact students. um, and it's just there's a lot of opportunities to travel, which I think is really cool. um, I don't think it should be like your main focus, but it should like it's there, and you should take
yeah.
advantage of like the opportunities you have. um, I really like I enjoyed my time there, and the more I look back on it, the more I enjoyed it, even though maybe at times during the year I was kind of miserable. um,
Hmm.
but I'd recommend, like, if you want some place that you can travel, or I hate bugs, and so I was like, there's no way I'm going to an island. And so like maybe you feel the kind of same way, look into Denmark, or like I'm not saying it's the most perfect place, but it doesn't have huge bugs. So like low key, it might be the perfect place.
No, I feel that. I mean, I think it's good to know that no, again, there may be a certain degree of comfortableness in different locations, but at the same time, you will still go through your own struggles and own hardships. Just like you were saying at the beginning, your first month will probably be very relatable to every SM around the world because everyone's probably having a terrible time. They're figuring it out. So no matter where you go, it's important to note. But that's super cool that in Denmark you have those opportunities to travel. That's one thing that I kind of wish I was a little jealous of. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I would see Carlos's Instagram. I'd be like, oh, that's so dope. But so that's super sick. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming onto the podcast. Do you have anything left that you would want to say?
I think if you're feeling at all called, or even just like a little tug on your heart to SM, like explore it. Go to the SM office, or like email in and like get information. And that's not to say like, oh, you have to, or like you're for sure like being called. I don't think everyone has to SM, but if you feel any sort of tug, I think explore it. Just because you get some initial information, or like fill out some like forms and stuff, isn't a commitment. But I think if you feel any sort of like tug from God, or like any sort of like curiosity, like just explore it a little bit. Like as soon as you get your foot in the door, like the opportunities can open up. And I felt that tug a little bit, and I almost didn't step foot into that office. And just last second, I was walking by and I decided to go in, and it's one of the most like transformative moments of my whole life.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I don't have anything to add to that because that's what I would usually say at the end of the podcast. So I'm glad that you were able to say it. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming again onto the podcast and saying, bringing up all these different topics. Would you mind if people are interested in Denmark, if they would be able to DM you or whatever, if I link your
Yeah,
Instagram, stuff like that?
definitely. If any questions about like SMing, even in general, like if you're not super interested in Denmark, but like you just have questions about SMing, or if you feel like kind of apathetic about changing your major like 2 or 3 times, like I did, feel free to reach out. Like I love talking to people about SM opportunities, and just like to let you guys all know, like almost every SM is like down to like tell you more about SMing. So, feel free to reach out to me or anyone who has SM'd. And yeah, I'd love to help out more.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll definitely go ahead and link your stuff when we post this. So yeah, again, I just want to thank you and I appreciate you for coming onto the podcast. With that, that is the close to episode 3. For you, those of you that are tuning in, be sure to tune in. Well, actually, next week there won't be an episode. My bad. But tune in when we get back for spring quarter for another episode of the Called Podcast. And with that, see you guys.